Ah, my dear friends, here, together, we explored the history of Rome and an entire era shaped in the shadow of Caesar. Step by step, we followed the story of a lifetime, a leader, a nation, a story that began in glory and ended in betrayal. We saw how Caesar built his power step by step, how he won allies and used his wits to outsmart his enemies. But we also realized that no matter how great a man's dreams, every victory comes at a price, and every triumph leaves deep shadows in its wake. Caesar's death brought Rome to the end of one era, but it also heralded the beginning of another. His life offers us one of the greatest lessons not only of power and ambition, but also of leadership in human history. As a figure standing at the intersection of the love and hatred of his people, Caesar was both hero and tragedy. The history books have not forgotten him. But dear friends, it is not only words that remember him, but the legacy he left. Imagine for a moment the political vacuum left by Caesar's death. The rise of Augustus laid the foundations of the Roman Empire and opened a whole new chapter in world history. Laying the glory of Rome nations is still resonate today. They clearly had no place in the picture for children to play in. They were always filled with good-natured fun. Or the story of Alice, both dons as well as winners, the self-righteous prince and giver of Spain. Storm and now I leave you with a question, my friends. Was Caesar, against all odds, a hero or a visionary who risked everything for power? The answer to this question perhaps depends on how we look at the past, what we learn from the stories. But remember, history is always waiting for its narrator. In the next video, we will talk about how Caesar's legacy transformed Rome into an empire, how Augustus rose on the scene, and how Rome moved towards its golden age. Get ready, because history never stops, my dear friends. See you soon. Ah, those glorious days of Rome. Imagine, dear friends, a time of colossal columns reaching to the sky, of people making politics with voices echoing in the forums, of clashing swords and epics written in history. But just as every story has a beginning, every rise has an end, doesn't it? Today, I will tell you the story of the fall of the glorious Roman Republic and the man at the center of it, a man who has been called both a hero and a tyrant, Gaius Julius Caesar. Yes, Julius Caesar. Caesar's name echoes around every corner even today. But the life of this great man was not only about victories and glory. He, friends, ran the streets of Rome with the naive dreams of a child, tasted the pain of exile and war in his youth, and then ruled a world empire with his sword and his wit. But what made him so powerful? What were the events that made Caesar one of history's unforgettable figures? Today, we'll take a look at each of them one by one, peeling back the veil of history and diving into his world in the turbulent days of Rome. But remember, dear listeners, like all great stories, Caesar's story begins with a seed. Who was this boy when it was unimaginable that he would become the most powerful man in Rome? From what roots did he come? It is here that we go back to the days of his birth and his childhood. What was the Roman Republic like in those days? What kind of a world did the Romans live in? For the answers to these questions, I am waiting for you in the next episode. Come on, let's start writing this story together. Dear listeners, imagine we are walking the streets of the glorious Roman Republic. The year is around 100 BC. Every corner of the city is alive and bustling, as if witnessing an unforgettable moment in history. But this was a time that revealed not only Rome's greatness, but also its crumbling structure. Let us first try to understand the state, social, and political structure of this gigantic republic in those days. Because before we start telling the story of a man, we need to understand the world he grew up in, don't we? At the beginning of the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic was the most powerful state in the Mediterranean. It had expanded through military victories and prospered economically thanks to the spoils of conquered lands. But this wealth was not shared equally by all. The population was divided into two. On the one hand, the aristocracy of large landowners and senators, the optimates. On the other, the poor plebeians, who filled the crowded streets of the cities. The plebeians tried to have a voice in the popular assemblies, but were often powerless against the influential policies of the Senate. Internal conflicts, economic instability, and political intrigue were undermining the Republic. And in the midst of this chaos, a star was born on the stage of history. Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar's origins lay in the Julii family, a family of great significance to the Romans. The Julii were a noble patrician family, and they traced their lineage back to the goddess Venus, who had an important place in Roman mythology. Yes, Caesar's family claimed that he was born with a divine connection, but even though they came from a long lineage, the Julii had lost their former power and influence by the time Caesar was born. It was now a dynasty that had once shone brightly but had now faded into the shadows. On a hot summer day in 100 BC, a child was born on the soil of Rome. His name was to be Gaius Julius Caesar. His birth may have seemed like an ordinary event, but who could have known that this little baby would one day change the fate of Rome and leave his mark on world history? Caesar's childhood years were spent in the crowded and noisy streets of Rome. In those years, the splendor of the Republic was still dazzling, but at the same time there was deep unrest. The people were looking for new leaders. Caesar grew up listening to his family's history and observing the injustices in his turbulent environment. To understand Caesar's childhood is to understand his future decisions and ambitions. He was no ordinary citizen of Rome. He was the child of a family that grew up with high ideals and a desire to regain power and prestige. It was under these circumstances that Caesar's first steps began to take shape. So how did this young boy become a leader? What experiences led him to become first a soldier and then a politician? To find out, in the next chapter, we will take a look at Caesar's teenage years and the critical events that happened during this period. Are you ready, my friends? Because we have only just begun. My dear friends, let us now imagine the young Caesar wandering the streets of Rome, a young man in the midst of the chaos, looking around with curiosity in his eyes, longing in his heart for a much greater future. But remember that great leaders are not just born. They are shaped by an education, experiences, and most importantly, a life full of difficult decisions. That's why let's take a journey back to Caesar's youth, because to understand him, we must first understand what he saw, learned, and experienced as a young boy. Caesar may have seemed like an ordinary man in his childhood, but he was a patrician, a member of the noble class. In Rome, this was not only a privilege, but also a heavy responsibility. Because the patricians were the guides of the people, the pillars of Rome, Caesar was raised with the awareness of this responsibility. He did not only learn to read and write, he was also educated in subjects such as philosophy, oratory, law, and military strategy, which were indispensable for the Roman aristocracy. In particular, the art of speech and the ability to influence the public would be his greatest weapon in the future. During his education, Caesar was influenced by ancient Greece and inspired by the achievements of Alexander the Great. For a young Caesar, the world was a place waiting to be conquered. But the road to his dreams would not be easy. The political scene of the Roman Republic was full of storms during Caesar's youth. On one side were the populars, who wanted to increase the power of the people, and on the other the optimates, who defended the aristocracy. Caesar's family was close to the popular, but things became even more complicated because in 82 BC, a general named Sulla took dictatorial powers and started a bloody purge in Rome. One by one, Sulla was eliminating the allies and supporters of Caesar's family. The young Caesar had a choice: either submit to Sulla and side with him, or remain loyal to his family. Caesar's choice was brave. Despite Sulla's frightening authority, the young Caesar defied his wishes. He even had to flee Rome and risk his life because of it. This was the moment when Caesar took his first political steps, showed his determination and courage, began to become a different figure in the eyes of the people, and embarked on an unforgettable story. But my dear friends, this was only the beginning, as Caesar still had more hearts to conquer and more battles to fight. Fleeing Rome, the young Caesar could have chosen to live a life of seclusion and wealth, like the aristocrats of the time. But it was in his blood to fight and to be a leader. He joined the Roman army, where he gained his first military experience. Caesar, who showed courage in the battles against Mithridates and attracted attention with his leadership skills, was not only a soldier, but also a leader, rehearsing for his future great campaigns. However, one of his greatest tests was not in the Roman army, but in the dangerous waters of the Mediterranean against coastal pirates. Yes, dear listener, Caesar was kidnapped by pirates as a young man. They planned to hold Caesar for ransom. But there was a funny detail in this story. Caesar told the pirates that he was worth very little. He asked them to ask for more ransom because he was too important to be sold for so little money. When Caesar was released after the ransom, he did not hold back from punishing these pirates. He tracked them down and had them all captured and executed according to Roman law. This, my dear friends, was an unforgettable moment that showed how extraordinary he was, even at a young age, in terms of justice, courage, and determination. But now we come to the real question. What kind of life would this young leader, this brave soul, lead back in Rome? How would he enter the political scene, and what paths would lead him to the top? If you're ready, in the next episode, we will witness Caesar's rise in Rome and his invincible determination. Wait, this is only the beginning. My dear friends, now imagine the noisy streets of Rome, the voices of the merchants echoing in the markets, a man walking among the crowd. He has a heavy burden on his shoulders, but he is not complaining. Because his eyes are looking to the future, he is determined to leave a mark in the history of Rome. That man is Gaius Julius Caesar, and the story of his rise is not the story of an ordinary politician, but a journey that changed the destiny of history. Caesar's first official step began with his ascent up Rome's political ladder. When he was appointed quaestor, it seemed like just another ordinary post. But for Caesar, it was an opportunity to learn the pulse of the people, to get a grasp of the inner workings of the system, and to build his grand plans for the future. It was during this time that he was stationed in Hispania, where he shone not only as a ruler, but also as a leader who won the love of the people. According to legend, when Caesar saw Alexander's statue, he stopped for a moment and said, Alexander had conquered the world at his age. I have done nothing yet. It is an unforgettable moment that betrays his ambition and great ambitions. Then, when she returned to Rome as aedilis, she became a shining star in the eyes of the people. She transformed Rome into a theatrical stage as she organized festivals, plays, and entertainment in the city. But there was something else behind these events: winning the love of the people. He was not only a leader, but also a friend of the people, and making them admire him. This was when he sowed the first seeds of his later populist policies. But, my dear friends, Caesar's real breakthrough came when he was elected Pontifex Maximus, the supreme religious leader of Rome. This position was not only a religious post, but also a political tool. Caesar was able to outshine his rivals with his diplomacy and intelligence. But remember, behind these achievements was not only talent, but also great courage, because Caesar had incurred a serious debt to win this election. This was showing once again how big his plans for the future were. The key to Caesar's success was not only his reliance on the aristocracy, but also on the people. He became the voice of Rome's lower classes and defended their rights. His populist policies posed a great threat to the optimates, the aristocratic class. Caesar not only organized lavish festivals to win the support of the people, but also took bold steps to improve their daily lives. Remember that in Rome, it was impossible to be a great leader without winning the love of the people. And Caesar never missed an opportunity to win that love. But this love also made him the target of many rivals. Caesar's rise did not go unnoticed by the optimates, and his political rivals looked for every opportunity to undermine him. But, my dear friends, Caesar's intelligence and determination did not allow any of these rivals' plans to work. He was making friends and frustrating the moves of his enemies at the same time. These conflicts established him as a real force in Roman politics. But remember, this was only the beginning, for Caesar would go on to take much bigger steps to take complete control of Rome. Caesar's political life was characterized by enmities as well as friendships. Especially his conflicts with the optimates played an important role in his political career. However, Caesar managed to turn these conflicts into advantages with clever moves. In every move, he rallied the people behind him and left his opponents alone. Caesar's ability made him much more than an ordinary politician. He was on his way to becoming a future dictator, one of Rome's greatest leaders. But now, my dear friends, the question is, what was Caesar's next move in the midst of these conflicts? How would this balance of power in Rome shape his future achievements? The answers to these questions will lead us to Caesar's Gallic campaign and one of Rome's greatest victories. Get ready, because the most exciting episodes are yet to come. Dear listeners, we are stepping into another era that took Rome's history by storm. Gaius Julius Caesar was about to form a partnership that would change the fate of Rome as his intellect and ambition continued to rise. But this partnership was no ordinary alliance. It was a power play that brought together three of the most powerful men in Rome. Caesar, together with Marcus, Licinius Crassus, and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, would reshape Roman politics. Historians call it the First Triumvirate, but we know it as the first great convulsion that began the downfall of the Roman Republic. Political power in the Roman Republic has always been a matter of balance. By 60 BC, however, this balance had begun to break down. Pompeius Magnus had become the greatest general of Rome with his conquests, and had become a hero in the eyes of the people. But the Senate, fearing his power, tried to minimize his achievements and wanted his army to be disbanded. Marcus Crassus, on the other hand, was the richest man of his time. With his wealth, he controlled many senators, but he also sought more power and prestige. Caesar, on the other hand, was a rising star in politics who had won the love of the people with his intelligence. But he too wanted more: control of Rome. These three men came together to protect their own interests and unite against the Senate. Caesar's intelligence, Crassus's wealth, and Pompeius's military might made them the true rulers of Rome. But against the background of this alliance, there were not only common interests, but also a complex power struggle. Each sought to control the others, but at the same time knew that they needed each other. The Triumvirate ostensibly provided a balance in the Roman Republic, but in fact it was a harbinger of coming storm. One of the biggest results of this alliance was Caesar's winning the Gallic prefecture. Situated on Rome's northern border, Gaul had always been a threat and a great opportunity. Caesar planned to use this governorship as a stepping stone, because he didn't want to be content with just being a figurehead in Rome. He wanted to be a legend. Gaul was the stage on which Caesar could realize his ambitions. Not only would he win military victories here, but he would also have a strong position against his political rivals in Rome. But winning this governorship was not easy. Caesar used his influence in the Triumvirate and the support of the people to win it. At the same time, the financial support of Crassus and the influence of Pompeius helped him to achieve this position. Caesar's success was a turning point not only for his personal career, but also for the future of the Roman Republic, because Caesar's years in Gaul would make him the most powerful man in Rome, both militarily and politically. The First Triumvirate was an alliance that shook the political structure of the Roman Republic to its foundations. The Senate feared the combination of these three men because together they controlled the support of both the people and the army. This weakened the traditional structure of the Republic. Rome no longer depended solely on the law, but on the power of individuals. The Triumvirate, though ostensibly a unity, was in fact rotting from within. For Caesar, Crassus and Pompeius each had their own plans to outdo the others, and this alliance, my friends, full of power games, would eventually drag Rome into an inevitable civil war. But first, we need to look at Caesar's victories in Gaul and how his reputation in Rome was at its peak. Caesar's actions in this new role would reveal his true colors, not only as a governor, but also as a conqueror and leader. So, dear listeners, what victories did Caesar achieve in Gaul? And what storm would these victories create on his return to Rome? In the next episode, we will discuss the legendary exploits of this great leader on the battlefield of Extraneous 13. Dear listeners, we come to the years that made the name of one of Rome's greatest commanders in history, Gaius Julius Caesar, legendary. The Gallic Wars. These wars, which expanded Rome's borders, immortalized Caesar's name and were perhaps one of the most effective military campaigns in history. Also ushered in an era that shook the foundations of the Republic. But, my dear friends, these wars were not just a struggle between Rome and Gaul. It was a display of political ambition, of military genius, and of power that changed the fate of peoples. So, let's start writing this epic together. Caesar's appointment as governor of Gaul was not only a political success for him, but also an opportunity to reshape Roman history. But Gaul was not a calm land. Ongoing conflicts between different tribes threatened Rome's northern border. The riches of Gaul were not something that could escape the eyes of an ambitious leader like Caesar. But the real issue was that Caesar needed a series of major victories to maintain his political power in Rome. For the Triumvirate was beginning to fracture, and his enemies in the Senate were watching for his weakness. Caesar's march into Gaul, while seemingly a necessity to secure Rome, was in fact a huge gamble to consolidate his own power. In 58 BC, the Helvetii tribe began a massive migration. This caused unrest among the other tribes of Gaul. Caesar presented the movement of the Helvetii as a threat and justified Roman intervention in Gaul. But Caesar's real aim was to prove to Rome and the world what a great leader he was by conquering Gaul. This move sparked the Gallic Wars, the beginning of a series of bloody conflicts that would last for 9 years. Now, my dear friends, we come to the most critical moment of the Gallic Wars, the Siege of Alesia. The Vercingetorix, the brave leader of Gaul, had managed to unite the tribes against Caesar. Alesia went down in history as Vercingetorix's last stand. Caesar proved himself here not only with his courage, but also with his military genius. Alesia was like a natural fortress built on steep hills. Vercingetorix was in a very strategic position to defend the city. But Caesar's brilliance was enough to overcome this superiority. He built a series of fortifications surrounding the city. Caesar set up a double-line defense system to thwart both the enemy from within and reinforcements from outside. The thousands of warriors fighting for the freedom of Gaul were helpless in the face of Caesar's tight siege. Vercingetorix was known for his bravery. When he saw his people starving, he realized that resistance was futile. So he mounted his horse and rode into Caesar's camp. He knelt before his enemies, offered his sword to Caesar, and surrendered. This moment was a scene that changed the fate not only of Gaul but of all of Rome. Caesar had won both a military and a psychological victory. Rome's northern border was now secured, and most of Gaul was now part of Rome. Caesar saw war as an art, not just a conflict. He constantly surprised his enemies with his foresight and innovative tactics. For example, the speed with which he built bridges and his engineering prowess showed what a military genius he was. Also, his mastery of motivating his army was one of the most important qualities that set him apart from other leaders. My dear listeners, Caesar's victories in Gaul were the crowning glory of his reputation in Rome. But these achievements were more than just victories. Caesar's epic conquests also opened the door to a civil war in the Roman Republic, because his enemies in Rome would not tolerate him becoming so powerful. It was time for Caesar to return to Rome. But what kind of a storm would this return be the beginning of? How would Caesar face a Senate in Pompey? My dear friends, let's meet in the next episode to find the answers to these questions. My friends, we come now to one of the most critical periods in history. Those dark days when Rome was seething with political conflict, when friendships and alliances gave way to betrayals, when the Republic was shaken by turmoil. Caesar's return to Rome after his victories in Gaul was not only the triumphal march of a leader, but also the harbinger of a great civil war. We remember this period with the famous saying on the banks of the Rubicon River, Alea Iacta est. The die is cast. Let's analyze the moments that shaped this history and it was 49 BC, and Caesar was on his way back to Rome after his victories in Gaul. But this return was not just the return of a leader to his homeland to celebrate a victory. During his years in Gaul, Caesar had not only conquered new territory, but had also earned the hatred of his enemies in Rome. His greatest rival, Pompey, with the support of the Senate, moved to weaken Caesar's power. Caesar's military victories and popularity with the people had become a threat to Pompeius and the nobles in the Senate. The Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army, to allow him to return to Rome from Gaul. But this was unacceptable for a leader like Caesar. To abandon his army was to play into the hands of his enemies. Caesar marched on Rome with his loyal soldiers, but there was one obstacle: the Rubicon River. This small river was a border, according to the laws of the Roman Republic. For a commander to cross the Rubicon with his army meant declaring war on Rome. Alea iacta est. The dice were cast, there was no turning back. Alea iacta est. The dice were cast, there was no turning back. And finally, the sentence that changed the course of history fell from his lips. Alea iacta est. The dice were cast. There was no turning back. Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his army, and thus took the first step of the civil war. The marks of time would soon show. The friendship between Caesar and Pompeius had once begun under the Triumvirate, but this alliance had fallen victim to political ambitions and personal rivalries. Pompeius was uncomfortable with Caesar's rising power. Caesar, on the other hand, saw Pompeius's collaboration with the Senate as a betrayal. The rivalry between these two great leaders was not just a personal conflict, but a battle over the future of the Roman Republic. Pompey had the full support of the Senate and had built up a large army in Rome. But Caesar relied not only on the strength of his army, but also on the love of the people. Under his leadership, the soldiers felt that they were devoted to an ideal, not to a leader. This was different from Pompey's soldiers. The Roman people saw Caesar as a hero and Pompeius as a cold aristocrat. The causes of the civil war lay in this difference in public perception between the two leaders and in political strife combined with personal ambition. After crossing the Rubicon, Caesar moved like a hurricane towards Rome. His troops were few, but Caesar's genius and leadership more than made up for it. Pompey believed he had built a strong army in Rome, but he was surprised by Caesar's speed. Caesar won one small victory after another, and Pompeius was forced to retreat. The strategy of the Senate and Pompeius was more about buying time than stopping Caesar's advance. When Caesar arrived in Rome, the city was almost empty. Pompey and his supporters had fled the city in panic, fleeing towards the Greek lands. The gates of Rome were open to Caesar, and the people hailed him as a savior. But this was the beginning of war, not victory. Caesar would embark on a great struggle across the Mediterranean, from Europe to Africa, to defeat Pompey once and for all. Caesar had driven Pompey out of Rome and won the support of the people. But the real big battle was at the door. Pompey was gathering a powerful army in Greece. These two great leaders of Rome would eventually face each other. But, my friends, this was not just a battle. It was a battle of destiny that would decide the future of the Roman Republic. So, how would the clash of these two leaders play out? Would victory lie in Caesar's genius or in Pompeius's plans? Let's meet in the next episode to find out the details of this epic encounter. Ah, my friends, the fate of Rome was to be rewritten in the bloody fields of Pharsalus. The long tension between Caesar and Pompeius was finally set to end in battle. But this was not just a showdown between two great leaders. It was a clash that would shape the soul, the past, and the future of the Roman Republic. Let me now take you to this great turning point in history. By 48 BC, Pompeius had left Roman territory and had amassed a powerful army in Greece. Caesar was in pursuit with a smaller army, but one with strong loyalty and discipline. When he arrived in Greece, he found that Pompeius had an enormous army of 400 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Caesar's army was almost half that size, but Caesar's leadership skills and battle strategies were far more powerful than numbers. When they met on the plain of Pharsalus, Pompey felt he had the advantage. His troops were more numerous, and his position was perfect for defense. But Caesar devised perhaps one of the most brilliant battle plans of his life. He deployed his reserves to target Pompeius' weak points and made strategic maneuvers to mislead the enemy during the attack. When the battle began, Caesar's army trapped Pompeius's powerful cavalry and completely neutralized them. Pompeius's morale collapsed, and his troops began to disperse. With Caesar's victory assured, the fields of Pharsalus decided the future of Rome. After the defeat at Pharsalus, Pompey abandoned the battlefield and fled east to seek refuge in Egypt. Egypt was then under the rule of the young king Ptolemy III. As Rome's great general, Pompey expected a warm welcome in Egypt. My friends, the cruel face of politics was once again revealed here. Ptolemy thought it was time to choose sides in the civil war in Rome. After Caesar's victory, he realized that it would be dangerous for him to support Pompey. So he chose to betray Pompeius. As soon as Pompey landed in Egypt, he was assassinated by men sent by the Ptolemies. Rome's once glorious general was quietly murdered on the shores of Egypt. And so, Caesar's greatest rival fell victim to political games. Upon hearing the news of Pompeius' death, Caesar was deeply saddened. Even among his enemies, Pompey had once been a friend and ally. But when Caesar arrived in Egypt, he found not only Pompeius' tragic end, but also a new political turmoil. The struggle for the throne between Ptolemy III and his sister Cleopatra had thrown Egypt into chaos. When Caesar entered Ptolemy's palace and saw Cleopatra, he knew that a new era had begun. Cleopatra was a ruler who made history with her intelligence as well as her beauty. Shortly after Caesar entered the palace, Cleopatra was secretly brought to Caesar's room as a diplomatic move. According to some rumors, this was done by wrapping her in a carpet. Cleopatra succeeded in winning Caesar to her cause, and their relationship upset the balance of power in Egypt. Caesar took Cleopatra's side against Ptolemy's army and soon defeated Ptolemy's forces, allowing Cleopatra to ascend to the throne of Egypt. This relationship was not only a political alliance but also a personal bond. Cleopatra gave birth to a son by Caesar, Caesarion. This bond was to reshape relations between Rome and Egypt. What obstacles would Caesar face on his way to becoming the absolute leader of Rome? How would his affair with Pompeius' death and wealth would face a people like Pompeius' daughter, or Caesar would face new threats in the east? And which god would Caesar face on his way to becoming the absolute leader of Rome? What obstacles would Caesar face on his way to becoming the absolute leader of Rome? My friends, let me take you back to those fascinating days when a new era in Caesar's destiny began. I will tell you how this great leader who triumphed on the battlefields and shaped the future of Rome lost his heart and mind to the charms of a ruler. Cleopatra had made her mark on the stage of history not only for her beauty, but also for her intelligence. And their paths would cross on the golden throne of Egypt, east of the Mediterranean. When he arrived in Egypt, Caesar was not only mourning the tragic death of Pompeius, he also found himself in the middle of the struggle for the throne between Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra. Ptolemy had deposed Cleopatra and sent her into exile. To return, Cleopatra needed not only an ally, but also an opportunity to use her political acumen and charm. That opportunity came when Caesar landed in Egypt. In her search for a way to confront Caesar, Cleopatra put into action an extraordinary plan that has gone down in history. According to rumors, the young monarch was wrapped in a carpet and secretly brought to Caesar's room. When the carpet was unwrapped, Cleopatra stood before Caesar with all her charm and determination. This act was not only a display of courage, but also a sign of Cleopatra's political genius. Caesar was impressed by the young queen's intelligence and vision. This meeting was the beginning not only of an alliance, but also of one of the most talked about relationships in history. Caesar decided to help Cleopatra regain her throne. He used his military might to defeat Ptolemy's army, and soon the balance of power in Egypt shifted in Cleopatra's favor. Ptolemy XIII was killed in a battle on the Nile River, and Cleopatra became the sole ruler of Egypt. But, my friends, there was not only political calculation behind this victory. The relationship between Caesar and Cleopatra was much deeper than a political alliance. Cleopatra managed to keep Caesar in Egypt for a while longer. Together they traveled along the Nile, exploring the splendor of Egypt. During this time, Cleopatra managed to grow close to Caesar, not only as a ruler, but also as a lover. This relationship would not only strengthen the ties between Egypt and Rome, but would also influence future history. When Caesar returned to Rome in 47 BC, he did not leave Cleopatra alone. He invited her to Rome. Cleopatra came to Rome with their son Caesarion. Caesarion was a symbol of immortalizing the relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar. Cleopatra's presence on the streets of Rome aroused admiration on the one hand, and jealousy and fear among the nobility on the other. Cleopatra began to influence the politics not only of Egypt, but also of Rome. In Rome, Cleopatra presented herself not as an ordinary queen, but as a goddess. The splendid clothes she wore and the Egyptian traditions and culture she carried with her fascinated the Roman people, while making the senators uneasy. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra divided Rome's aristocratic class. Some saw this union as a threat. Cleopatra's influence on Caesar shows that she was not only a lover but also a partner in strategy. Caesar's ties with Cleopatra began to shift the balance in Roman politics. Cleopatra's presence in Rome played an important role in Caesar's consolidation of power. But it was also a reason for his enemies to mobilize against him. Cleopatra's political acumen and influence over Caesar led Caesar's enemies to accuse her of acting like a king. Caesar and Cleopatra's relationship was sealed not only by political intrigue and power plays, but also by an heir. Caesarion was born in 47 BC. Cleopatra saw her son as the future ruler of both Egypt and Rome. But my friends, Caesarion's birth caused great consternation among the nobility in Rome. Caesar's affair with an Egyptian woman and Caesarion's birth were perceived as a threat to republican values. Cleopatra did not hesitate to promote her son as Caesar's heir. Caesarion became a symbol immortalizing Caesar's power. However, this would only further provoke Caesar's enemies. The growing unrest against Caesar in Rome was deepened by the presence of Cleopatra and Caesarion. Cleopatra and Caesar's relationship united the destinies not only of two people, but of two civilizations. But, my friends, this bond raised tensions in Rome to a dangerous level. As Caesar set out to shape the future of Rome, what role would Cleopatra and Caesarion play in his life? How would Cleopatra's presence in Rome galvanize Caesar's enemies? And most importantly, are you ready to find out what fate Caesar will face in this game of love and power? Dear listeners, here we come to one of the most dramatic moments in history. As the skies over Rome darkened with clouds, whispers shook the walls of the Senate halls. Julius Caesar, who had lived a life of power and glory, would now face his own mortality. Yes, my friends, in this episode, I will tell a story where friend turns into enemy and admiration turns into betrayal. But let's pull back this dark curtain together. Caesar was at the center of attention, not only of the people, but also of his enemies. By 44 BC, a group defending the traditional structure of the Roman Republic was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with Caesar's power. This group longed to restore Rome's ancient freedoms. The Republican opposition feared that Caesar's dictatorial powers would turn Rome into a monarchy. Will he be a king, or will he be the protector of the people? These questions echoed through the Senate. At the head of this opposition were two names, Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Brutus was known as an honest man, a hero of the people. He became like a son to Caesar. Some rumors even claimed that he might be Caesar's illegitimate son. Cassius, on the other hand, was ambitious, cunning, and a master of political games. Both men admired Caesar for different reasons, but at one point their admiration was overshadowed by their love of the Republic. Two old friends were now coming together to betray Caesar. Brutus and Cassius were torn between their loyalty to Caesar and the ideals of the Republic. Caesar's popularity with the people was so high that it took courage to openly oppose him. Therefore, they had to carry out their plans in secret. Together with a group of senators, they laid the foundations of a conspiracy. Their aim was to free Rome from Caesar's shadow. Unfortunately, this liberation would be part of a story written in blood. Cassius became the mastermind of the assassination plot. He was the one who organized the plot, convinced the senators, and mobilized Brutus. But Brutus's involvement was the biggest blow for Caesar. Caesar was known for his trust in Brutus. The moment that made him say, "Not you too, Brutus," would go down in history. But we're not there yet, my friends. Patience. And the fateful day arrived, the 15th of March. This date, known as the Ides of March, would change the fate of Rome forever. Caesar had had an argument with his wife that morning. Calpurnia had dreamt that Caesar had been stabbed and tried to persuade him to stay at home. But Caesar didn't believe in prophecies. Cowards die many times before they die, he is reported to have said. Like a leader defying his own fate, he insisted on going to the Senate. As soon as Caesar stepped into the Senate, the plan was set in motion. Senators surrounded him under the pretext of presenting him with a petition. Caesar was suddenly the target of knife blows. The first blow stunned him. The attacks that followed knocked him to the ground. The most tragic moment was when Brutus raised his knife. As soon as Caesar saw him, he cried out, "You too, Brutus." Ah, dear friends, this moment was not only the death of Caesar, but also the death of a friendship. When Caesar collapsed in a pool of blood, an era of Rome was over. But this death would not bring silence, but a storm. For Caesar's legacy was more powerful than even his enemies could have imagined. How would his death affect Rome? Would his assassination lead to the rebirth of the Republic? Or would it plunge Rome into even greater turmoil? Hold on, my friends, because here is the story of the turbulent period that followed Caesar's death. You ready? Hey. My dear friends, here we are witnessing one of the most shocking events in history, and one whose repercussions will reverberate for centuries. The death of Julius Caesar symbolized not only the end of a leader's life, but also the closing of an era for the Roman Republic. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, the shockwave that exploded in the heart of Rome, combined with the anger of the people, swept through the streets of the city. So what legacy did this death leave? Let's delve deeper into this turbulent period together. As Caesar's blood spilled onto the cold stones of the Senate Hall, the people of Rome were not yet aware of the tragedy, but the news spread quickly. Caesar is dead. As this sentence echoed throughout Rome, people were horrified. Because Caesar was not just a leader, he was a hero to the people. For most Romans, he was a figure who fed the hungry, cared for the welfare of the people, and restored Rome to greatness. Now this figure had been treacherously assassinated in front of the people. The public outcry soon spilled out into the streets. People were mourning and expressing their anger. When Caesar's body was brought to the forum for cremation, crowds gathered. The air in Rome that day was thick with anger, grief, and revenge. It was here that Marcus Antony made his historic speech. "My friends, Roman citizens," he began, setting the hearts of the ground on fire. He told of the good Caesar had done for the people, of how he dreamed of making Rome an empire. Finally, he revealed Caesar's will. He had left part of his personal fortune to the people. This made the love of the people even greater and fueled the anger against the Senate. Dear friends, Caesar's death paved the way for the birth of a new leader. It was Gaius Octavius, Caesar's adopted son and nephew, the young man who would later become known as Augustus. Octavian came on the scene soon after Caesar's death. Although only in his early 20s, he was noted for his intelligence and political skills. But it was not an easy rise. A power struggle began between him and Marcus Antony. As these two figures clashed for the future of Rome, the people mourned and wondered what this new era would bring. Octavian sought revenge through a temporary alliance with Antony. These forces, brought together to hunt down assassins, dreamed of restoring the old order of Rome. However, dear friends, this alliance did not last long either. Another war was inevitable between leaders desperate for power. And so, the storm that began with Caesar's death plunged Rome into civil war. Caesar's death was the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic. His reforms and his influence on the people had radically changed Rome. The assassins thought that Caesar's death would save the Republic, but on the contrary, it led Rome into an even greater transformation. Caesar's name became synonymous with a vision of empire. The people now wanted a strong leader. They did not want a chaos and uncertainty. And so the foundations of the Roman Empire were laid. Caesar's legacy was not only his military victories and reforms. His name is the essence of the idea of empire. Caesar's descendants fought to keep keep his legacy alive. And so the foundations of the Roman Empire were laid. Caesar's descendants fought to keep his legacy alive. But dear friends, this story is not yet complete. After Caesar's death, do you wonder how the rivalry between Octavian and Antony for control of Rome turned out? Who will triumph and decide Rome's new destiny? Ah, my dear friends, here we are witnessing one of the most shocking events in history, and one whose repercussions will reverberate for centuries. The death of Julius Caesar is symbolized not only the end of a leader's life, but also the closing of an era for the Roman Republic. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, the shock wave that exploded in the heart of Rome, combined with the anger of the people, swept through the streets of the city. So what legacy did this death leave? Let's delve deeper into this turbulent period together. As Caesar's blood spilled onto the cold stones of the Senate Hall, the people of Rome were not yet aware of the tragedy, but the news spread quickly. Caesar is dead. As this sentence echoed throughout Rome, people were horrified, because Caesar was not just a leader, he was a hero to the people. For most Romans, he was a figure who fed the hungry, cared for the welfare of the people, and restored Rome to greatness. Now, this figure had been treacherously assassinated in front of the people. The public outcry soon spilled out into the streets. People were mourning and expressing their anger. When Caesar's body was brought to the forum for cremation, crowds gathered. The air in Rome that day was thick with anger, grief, and revenge. It was here that Marcus Antony made his historic speech. "My friends, Romans, citizens," he began, setting the hearts of the crowd on fire. Finally, he revealed Caesar's will. He had left part of his personal fortune to the people. This made the love of the people even greater and fueled the anger against the Senate. Ah, dear friends, Caesar's death paved the way for the birth of a new leader. It was Gaius Octavius, Caesar's adopted son and nephew, the young man who would later become known as Augustus. Octavian came on the scene soon after Caesar's death. Although only in his early 20s, he was noted for his intelligence and political skills. By claiming Caesar's legacy, he won the love of the people. But it was not an easy rise. A power struggle began between him and Marcus Antony. As these two figures clashed for the future of Rome, the people mourned and wondered what this new era would bring. Octavian sought revenge through a temporary alliance with Antony. These forces, brought together to hunt down assassins, dreamed of restoring the old order of Rome. However, dear friends, this alliance did not last long either. Another war was inevitable between leaders desperate for power. And so, the storm that began with Caesar's death plunged Rome into civil war. Caesar's death was the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic. His reforms and his influence on the people had radically changed Rome. The assassins thought that Caesar's death would save the Republic, but on the contrary, it led Rome into an even greater transformation. Caesar's name became synonymous with a vision of empire. The people now wanted a strong leader. They did not want chaos and uncertainty. And so the foundations of the Roman Empire were laid. Caesar's legacy was not only his military victories and reforms. His name is the essence of the idea of empire. Caesar's descendants fought to keep his legacy alive. The face of Rome changed forever, and a world empire was born. But, dear friends, this story is not yet complete. After Caesar's death, do you wonder how the rivalry between Octavian and Antony for control of Rome turned out? Who will triumph and decide Rome's new destiny?